Good evening. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great, fabulous. It's a tremendous pleasure to be back, and hopefully you'll enjoy my talk this evening. Before I get into my material, I have been asked to make an announcement about a lecture that will be occurring here in Rainey Auditorium, The Monuments Men, Lessons for the 21st Century. This will be a lecture by Laurie Rush, who works with the Cultural Resource Program out of Fort Drum. I would say if you have more questions about it, Brian is sitting right there. I'm sure he would be happy to answer questions about this. I would encourage everybody to attend. It's Wednesday, February 12th, and it will be at 6 p.m. Okay. Maybe I would say before I get into what I'm going to talk about, I'll also mention what I won't be talking about. Yes, I'll be doing 3D visualizations, and I use them, and different types of modeling. I don't do video games. I don't do modeling like one would find in video games, even though we have the Pantheon in the background. But this is from Assassin's Creed, and when they visit Rome in the 16th century. Neat stuff, but I don't do that. Also, my project is looking at many cities, okay? And so North Africa had we know about 675 municipal entities across Roman Africa. Obviously, I'm not going to model all of them, but that means if you're going to look at many of them, you can't be getting maybe to such a degree of detail that you might have within the Rome Reborn project. Rome Reborn is a whole separate entity. Various issues are raised with it. Some things are well done, some things I'm concerned about, but it's a very different project. For my talk this evening, you'll see a series of 3D visualizations, or sometimes I'll simply call them digital recreations, and I have a very specific way of how these things were put together and how they're actually used. For my digital images, I use 4 basic things. I look at archaeological data, I'm looking at historical sources, comparative material, and of course, creative thinking. All of these things need to go together. No, don't laugh about creative thinking. I mean, think about this from a design perspective. I will be talking about design. I'm not simply speaking about archaeological, stones that we are then saying, okay, from this stone goes on top of that stone. We're looking at larger issues. We're looking at ideas of design, okay? And can we understand a process of design, or understanding why things are done the way they are? If we look at these from a perspective of design, yes, we have to often be thinking creatively to say, okay, what about putting it this way? Or if it is this way, why is it that way? Okay? Please note something very important. The arrows go both ways. For me, the digital model or the 3D visualization, that's not the end product. Okay? It is this amazing research tool. It's something in the process to help us understand things. And often when those digital models are created, does it force us to then go back to look at our comparative data in a different way, or read the sources in a different way, or even study more closely the archaeological data? Yes, it does. And so that's how I use the digital models. As Bob mentioned, I was in an architecture program at Arizona State University. When I was there, I was the architectural historian. I was tasked with teaching the history of architecture from prehistory to the present day from a global perspective. That's all. And I was supposed to cover all of that in 2 semesters. In a large survey format, usually with about 100 to 200 students. Great, doable. Okay. I was also tasked with teaching advanced seminars. Great, fun, variety of topics. But my one boss, Darren Petrucci, said, I want you to be teaching seminars on your very specific research. And I said, you know I work in North Africa, ancient Roman material. I said, do you know the scholarship? He says, no. I said, okay, well, scholarship, it's in French, it's in German, it's Italian, and some English. I said, our students don't have those language skills. And he said, so, figure it out. Okay. So there was the challenge of figuring it out. And instead of focusing on what the students couldn't do, I said, what can they do? And here I was in a design program. And so here are these design students who can run circles around me left and right about their digital models and said in the various computer systems, as well as these are very creative. They were very creative thinkers. And so I said, how about we create a course around that creativity and let's say their skill sets, and then pair those students with maybe students who are in classics or ancient history or art history who have a far greater grasp of Roman culture, material culture, Roman architecture, etc. And so from that, I created a course called Digital Rome. They wanted only 2-word titles, and that's what it got reduced to, Digital Rome. No reply. Oh, yeah, it's crazy. But anyway, with all of this, these students that took this course, it was offered several times, I list their names here, okay? Because I give them a lot of credit. They forced me to think about my material in different ways, and they pushed the material in a lot of different ways. These students worked in groups of either 2 or 3 over various semesters, worked on various digital models. Students where you see an asterisk right here for like Justin and Bobby and Sauri and Raphael, these were research assistants that I hired. They did excellent work. I hired them to push some of the digital models further. Okay. And so you'll be seeing certainly some of their work. So what were they doing, and what were we doing in this course, and what does it relate to, let's say, my larger work? I'm really interested in large issues of design, certainly architectural design, but also urban design. Can we think about how cities, not just cities are planned, but how do we see these changes occur over time? What are the ways that, to use the great expression or the term architectural dialogues, what are the architectural dialogues that are occurring, okay? And then, or large gestures, architectural gestures. And then with this, I was interested not only what might be happening in one city, but thinking about this across many cities. And again, North Africa would certainly give us that opportunity. But within that, and here we have the, standard image of, the Roman Empire. We see it in orange around the Mediterranean. Yeah, it's a very large area. We have to keep in mind that things that we might be seeing in this area are going to be very different than what we have over here, or around Athens. I mean, this is just one of these things that we've been working on. I've been part of a Getty project about the art of Rome's provinces. And with that, yes, I was tasked to be writing about North Africa, which is wonderful. But to be thinking about this large material, is it just every structure in every city? Well, that would be a bit much. For me, I focused my work pretty much on, let's say, almost this center of these cities, looking at, let's say, the Roman Forum, for the Forum in these cities. Here's a view of, obviously, the Forum in Rome, and think about this. Obviously, these are the, cultural centers, social centers, political centers, as well as religious centers. And obviously, for this image, we can recognize some of the, incredibly prominent temples. One here, another here, one here, columns right here. You can see, the evidence of this all over the place. And here's obviously just a plan of it. We were standing up over in this direction, looking in this manner. The question becomes, how does this all play out in North Africa? What's happening with those, shall we say, also issues of identity, or thinking about cultural transmission? Well, when we think about North Africa, and I'll be showing things from Carthage, Duga, Spatla, Menanx, of course, Timgad, right over here. We have to realize that this is obviously a populated area before the Roman Empire. That you have, the Carthaginian Empire right here. There are many places along the coast, but of course many areas inland. And so one has to think about what's happening at these sites as, let's say, transition into the actual empire, and then as we go on for an extended period of time. Some of these places, like Timgad, these are new cities. Some places like Duga, they were in existence already. Carthage, a much more complex history. And of course, I had to mention Menangs because obviously the Gerber project, which Penn sponsored, did a lot of the work right there. I'm going to show a couple of images just about from several of these cities before focusing on two examples of, let's say, some of the digital modeling that's been done to help us understand what happened at the city of Timgad as well as the city of Carthage. I mentioned Carthage as obviously being this empire. When it was excavated in the 70s, 80s as part of the UNESCO campaign, Por Sauver Carthage, this wonderful section was excavated by the French. And here you actually see these are houses dating from the 2nd century BCE. And then this was all covered and underneath a very large platform for the center of the Roman city, elevated up on the Birsa hill. And if we were to pivot the camera in this direction, we would see it's so close to the water. And I have views from this that we'll get to later on. Carthage, yes, it was destroyed. It was obviously rebuilt by the Romans, and Friedrich Rackhoff in his wonderful article on the making of Augustan Carthage stated that this was maybe one of the largest urban reclamation projects. And not just because it was a large site, but how could you actually move building materials from one part of a city, sort them, and then even reuse them in other parts of the city? And this certainly happened with building blocks, and I would be happy to talk about that. Like I said, Carthage is not the only city where this occurred. One could also obviously talk about Dugas of having this very early history with this amazing mausoleum right here. And then this great temple that we have from the, let's say, mid-2nd century. Was that site simply cleared or empty? No. We actually know that some of the earlier remains from the city of Dugas are actually right there. And we also know that we had two communities within the city of Dugas. Shall we say, an earlier indigenous community, as well as also Roman settlers right there. One of the other places of great interest is Spatla, not too far away. You can drive from Dugas to Spatla. And here's its forum structure. We see these large temples right on its forum. We'll have its surrounding wall right here. Its early history, it's pretty much unknown. We know when things start to appear in let's say, in the late 1st century, and then a lot of building in the 2nd century. But here's this site with great opportunity, but also a heck of a lot of things are still there, which is great. When you wish to talk about individuality in design, or even site specificity, we could stop at Villa Regia. And here's one of the residential structures. You might say, okay, great, we're seeing some type of peristyle, but keep walking, what do you find? You find these fabulous underground rooms, underground complexes. And so here are these houses. Yeah, we're concerned about architectural design. We can get our hexagonal windows, great central areas here. This allows light into these deep chambers down below. You have great stuff. You have individuality in this design, okay? We're certainly seeing it in residential areas. We can also see it in city centers. Now, while you certainly have sites like this, I mentioned we have sites which have, we have over 600 known municipal entities. Also realize some sites might not have a lot of standing structures. And there are several people sitting in the back right over there who know the site very well. And yes, you see the forum? It's right there. Trust me. This is an amazing basilica forum basilica right here. Possibly a temple over here, another one over here. We have some remains, but certainly not standing buildings. And we see this is right on the sea. And this is part of the Gerber project. Not part of the Gerber project, but part of the work done by some of my students. Student was intrigued. Wasn't taking the class. He had actually graduated. Asked, can I just sit in? Do you mind if I digitally model something? Yeah, of course, do it. So he's like, I'll work on your basilica. What happens when we model it? And let's really highlight the purple and gold sculptures that we had across there. Okay, the colors are a little extreme. We can easily adjust that, but it gives us a greater understanding of that space. Now, if we were to contrast something like this, we have other cities which even have, this has maybe not a whole lot there visually. It takes us a lot to get here, and trust me, there's argumentation for all of that. But what happens when we go to a city like Timgad, which has all of this? Well, some people say, well, we have all of this. We have the material right there. We have all the answers. Well, true, we have a lot of data. But what happens when we start taking it apart? What happens when we start asking the questions about urban design? What happens when we say, okay, this is maybe its last phase, but does all of this date to the same time? No, it doesn't. We know that here's a city. It's founded in the year 100, but so much changes. It is actually a very small city. We can see that it was initially bounded right here. This is all later material. And even some of the stuff in here is later. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about its urban development, if you will, and then spend some time right here with its Capitolium complex and try to understand what's happening with our Capitolium outside of our city. If we go from this aerial view to a normal plan, you can see very clearly here's your original gridded city, and then all of this. What happened? Well, let's diagram it. Let's actually look at what we have right here. And the more time you spend looking at it, you can actually see that there's at least 3, if not 4 different ways for urban expansion and aspects of urban design. Number 1, we have our Cardo and our Decumanus. Do we actually see some structures which do seem to respond to that? Some, out here, large bath complex, but certainly not everything. Do we have some buildings which appear to respond to pre-existing roads? This leads off to yet another major city. And so we can have these buildings responding to it on this side, this responding over here. Do we have some things, like the Capitolium right over here, which appear to be on something completely different? These are all grouped together on one slide. I'm not suggesting that these all go together, other than to suggest they have different organizing systems that might not go with the earlier ones. And let's not forget we have development still within the city. The really fun part is when we stop and realize that some of these methods are being done at the same time. This is not something that we're going to say we have a sequential pattern for these urban design strategies. We actually have them overlapping. And so that's the fun part, is to say we have different systems occurring at the same time. Now let's also tease out why these things are being done. If we were to go back to the plan, we can see right there in the middle, we actually have our forum. Some recent work on the forum shows that this is something that also develops over time. I was intrigued by the forum when I visited Timgad. I had the pleasure of being there several years ago, and I literally spent 8 hours just in the middle of the city. Now, granted, there weren't a whole lot of people there, and there is, in essence, something similar to almost like a national park service. And so the gentleman would come along like every half hour or so and ask, is everything all right? I was like, yes, you have a forum. I'm happy. They would come back every half hour or so, and they were just surprised I would stay there that long. They had so few visitors that they just kept coming back over and over. One of the things that stood out for me, and this is the area of the forum, is that there was only one temple on the forum. Now, my dissertation work was actually looking at Roman fora in North Africa, and so this stood out for me. I went through the mental list of all the cities I knew. And I said, well, how many of these cities actually only have one temple on the forum? And, going through, and I'm like, I can't come up with one off the top of my head. And then I was like, wait, no, there is one. You can think about it at Mactar, but that's its second forum. We have two fora at that city. So the initial forum, yes, there are multiple temples. Okay. But this stood out, and it set me on this path to try to understand placement of the temples. And very interestingly, right next to it is this large site. This is a later temple, and this is a site for the theater. Quite interestingly, that theater is actually later. It's not, the city is founded in year 100. The inscription for the theater takes it into the late 160s. And so I started thinking, wow, we have available land. This is the view of the forum area for a temple. If we were to just turn this way, we would actually be the space for that theater. Could this actually be a zone for more, let's say, religious structures? But I was drawn to that Capitolium out there. I was like, gosh, that's a good distance away. What happens when one visits it? Well, we have this great pathway. We see this is actually not just a singular temple, but it's actually a temple right here set within this very large porticoed space. The really interesting thing about scale is that people often point out that the square footage of this for the Capitolium is actually larger than the forum itself. And I thought, okay, that is obviously quite interesting, but there has to be more to the story than that. When you go, you can see one of the capitals right here, and here's another one. That water bottle, that's one of those 1.5-liter water bottles. And the screen only slightly exaggerates the scale. That capital is taller than me. Okay? That's how big it is. We're dealing with a massive Capitolium complex. Actually, it's the largest Capitolium complex preserved in North Africa. Okay? Granted, we don't know all Capitolia, but of the ones that are preserved, it is the largest. And here it is in the city far removed. And I should point out at this point that the date for this Capitolium is, shall we say, it's a contentious issue. Some people would like to see it early 3rd century. Some people have written that it's mid-2nd century. I was obviously intrigued that we actually have two-piece capitals, and one could actually do something with that. I will be back literally in this museum in 7 weeks to speak specifically on Timgad for the AAMW Friday lunch. We'll go into great details on the capitals at that time. But when we put one of those capitals up over here, or put the entire row here, we're dealing with a massive Capitolium. For the digital modeling, we weren't looking at every last detail, let's say, on the capital. That would actually kill the program, as we try to move through an entire city. Could we block out the form and still make it very useful? Of course. We haven't put in the capitals, but those details aren't the biggest concern for us when we're looking at this on an urban scale. Of course, going to put some people in to give us a rather good sense of scale. What happens, though, when we start thinking about the places where this Capitolium could have gone? Should it always just be outside the original city? As I said, I was intrigued by the fact that that theater, comes in later. What's the possibility that that site was intended for religious structures? Well, if they wish to build on this scale, is that theater site actually large enough? One student modeled part of the theater hill, tried to put the large Capitolium on that site, blocking in some of the other structures for the forum, and it doesn't fit. Okay? One of the questions could come up, well, if you have this amazingly gridded city, couldn't you actually place this on the grid? Sure you could, and have it correspond over here. But how much of your city then would actually be able to view the actual facade of this building? Not much. Can we then pivot the structure? Sure. The beauty of digital modeling. It now faces the middle. How great. Question becomes, though, what happens when you have your afternoon sun? And here we can simply do a shadow study. This modeling, it's simply done in a very basic program called SketchUp. It's a free software. And it's simple for students to learn. They can learn it and do the modeling well within a semester. Okay? And then we can obviously do light studies. Something like this. Now, what happens when we just even block out large altars, statue bases, etc. within the forum? We get something quite interesting. And I think this is part of the answer. But there's your Capitolium. Here we're actually standing right there in the forum. Capitolium's certainly not physically on the forum, but visually it is there. It is part of the forum. Can we actually then say, yeah, it may not fit at this site right here, but we have this thing that's actually working with the forum, even though there's no longer space right there. And again, student was just interested, blocking out spaces. We don't know what this zone would have been for like this top part of some of these things. Let's just put the dotted lines in. But let's also think about that relation to the Capitolium out there. This issue with the Capitolium raises a lot of other fun questions. It also makes us think about, well, this is the largest one still preserved, and this is at a city that's way out there. What about what was happening at a major city like Carthage? Can we go to Carthage? Can we digitally model the city? Yes, we can. Excuse me, and here's more of an aerial shot of that view of the Capitolium towards the forum. If we return to Carthage, we have to keep in mind its massive scale. Here's this legendary drawing that was part of Rockhoff's article. The pink grid reflects the Roman grid that is put over the city. The light blue, you see one form right here and another pattern right over here. These are the earlier Punic organizational systems. They're actually different. We have a radial plan right here, and right here we see something that is obviously corresponding to the coast. Here's the open sea, and then we have the two harbors right here. Obviously, even with this drawing, you can see the intense topography of the site. It's great. But the thing about a drawing like this, it still reads as flat. Again, this is the beauty of digital modeling. What happens if we simply start to block it out? We realize the distance from the sea to the top of the Bierce Hill right here, it's 55 meters. If we're thinking about putting together these city blocks, they're sizable. How do we actually model them? How do we go about doing it? Well, take a lot of iterations to work something out. Can we think about our city blocks literally going up the hillsides here around the Bierce Hill, the so-called Hill of Juno right here, a space for the theater over there? What I'm going to show you is right now, as part of another project that I was working on with the digital modeling, was to say, one of the things that the digital modeling will enable us to do is to actually think about this city from the sea. That I worked on a project looking at, in relation to William MacDonald's great term, urban armature. Can we think about a sea armature? Can we think about how you move through a city, but do it from, literally do it from the sea? Are our buildings responding to the sea far more than, let's say, other parts of the city? Due to the position of Carthage on the coast and the placement of how ships would approach, ships are going to come from this very simple direction. Can we then begin to think about the organization of the buildings and the city as a whole responding to that sea? For this exercise in looking at the urban armature, I was, with the sea armature, I wanted to look at the city in the 2nd century. We have the Antonine Baths, solid mid-2nd century. We have many structures or parts of the city that were destroyed by fire in the 2nd century. So we have 2nd century building phases for many of these things. This enables us to look at those. If we approach the city, if you will, from the north, the very first things that we would see massive things that we would see would be the baths. And still today, when you go to the city of Carthage, you can visit this bath complex. Okay? The really great thing is you walk right here, and right there, which you don't have access to, sadly, that's actually the ground level or first floor level for the bath complex. All of this below, this is the substructure. This is being built right on the coast. So stuff which would normally be below ground was actually elevated, had to be elevated. And you can see your coast is right there. We know that this land for the baths, this is actually reclaimed land. It took up 4 city blocks to put this bath complex, for this bath complex. The actual scale, yeah, it's pretty big. Your columns inside, large vaulted space, same scale as what you have in front of the Pantheon. Yeah. And this is just, made, 20 years later. You're dealing with a massive bath complex inside. So you have one person right over here, she's a little bit shorter than me, gives you a sense of scale, and yes, this has been reconstructed. And then falling, vaulting, like you wouldn't believe. If we start to digitally model this, we also get a sense of this massive facade. The thing about that facade, there's only one place to view it, and that's actually from the sea. You don't have any other place within the city to view it. For me, it's pretty clear that yes, this is responding to the water. It was responding to how people would be approaching the city. And again, this is something that's simply blocked out. Yes, we can put our porticos in, get something like that, but it's giving us also relative height for many of the other things, putting in the topography, what else is happening on the city, within the city. If we were to move along, let's say in a boat, and here we're back literally a couple 100 meters so we can get a view of all of this, what happens when we approach that Biersa Hill right here? This is the Roman Forum. It has, as we can see right here, a massive basilica, a massive forum basilica. It's the largest basilica outside the city of Rome. Again, this was part of the French excavations as well. If we're to literally view this amazing view up from the sea, we know that there's evidence for a possible later arch right here. It is that basilica that actually dominates. We do have evidence for yet a temple here, possibly a Capitolium beyond, but it's hard to say. But you might be asking, wait a minute, you just showed us a reconstruction of a Capitolium. Can your SketchUp model over here speak to your SketchUp model over here? Can we import the Capitolium from Timgad, put it in Carthage, just to give us a sense, not to say exactly that it was that, but to give us a sense? Of course we can do it. And look how small it looks on the forum itself. Again, we know very little about the Capitolium at Carthage, but now we get a relational understanding for the largest, the best preserved in all of North Africa. That one right there, and of that scale. Now you might ask, if we leave it in just temporarily, what about the view from the sea? And the reason why it's placed right here is this is one of the hypothetical locations that would respond to the porticos right here. How much of this do we see at the scale that it's built in Timgad? That little blip of a roof? That's it. Wow. Again, we don't know the details. of the Capitolium here, but this gives us an idea. If it was meant to be viewed from the sea, it just might have had to be, a larger complex, things like that. And again, the interesting thing is, Basilica still dominates. Here's yet the other view. It's not large enough to be even seen over that basilica. Pierre Gros, who wrote beautifully about this basilica, commented that it was this amazing anchor for the coastal side of the Bierce Hill, but talking about the Forum as a complex. I said, for me, I'm like, what about from the other side? What about viewing it from the water? It doesn't just anchor, it literally blocks the view of so many other things. Now, if you really wish to have fun, and I just commented about the scale of the Capitolium, can you actually import the entire model of Timgad and place it over the Bierce Hill, the Forum for Roman Carthage? Yeah, you can. So we ghosted it in. Right here, this dark line, that's for the most part, your original city of Timgad. Right over there is your location for your Capitolium, and here's your Forum for Carthage. Let's talk scale. Excuse my French on a Thursday evening. It's pretty damn big. And this is beginning to give us a sense of how the city is working in relation to so many of the other cities. Again, this is, as you can see, we're just blocking out forms. We're blocking out city blocks. It's giving us a relational sense of scale here, of how these things could have worked in relation to each other. The other thing to note about this, if we were to go back to our coastal view, is we can go along, get a sense of maybe where some of these warehouses might have been along the sea, and we come down to one of the harbors. And we see that this is this view, major elements one after another coming from the Bierce Hill up here, terminating down in our harbor right there. We see literally one thing after another, this great pacing throughout the entire city. And if we were to step even further back, where we would be viewing all of this, step back, yes, we have our bath complex. Yes, we can think about the Bierce Hill. Yes, we can think about a possible location of a temple over here behind the harbor over here, we're seeing how these are all relating to each other as this movement along from the sea. In many ways, we do have the sea armature. You might ask, oh gosh, it seems pretty straightforward. You build along the coast, is every city going to have a sea armature? Short answer is no, because some of these cities will actually expand greatly inland. If you were to, some of them obviously still have coastal expansions, but you have great inland expansion. Great example of this is obviously Leptis Magna, modern-day Libya. You can think about what occurs under Septimius Severus. It expands greatly inland. Okay, so not all cities are doing this, but some of them are. And the use of the digital modeling enables us to, map this out, to work out, tease out this argument. And then obviously allows us to work with several cities at the same time. In my classes, our students would have digital models of 4, 5, maybe 6 cities at the same time. So we could talk about those architectural dialogues occurring. And that was really great. And so a student might be working on a Sabrata and have a question about Leptis Magna. Somebody at Spatla is having a question about Duga. And then obviously all this material at Timgad possibly informing these things. So with this digital modeling, it certainly enables us to think about the actual design issues that we're seeing in these cities. And some of these things we're seeing a certain, like I stated, individuality. This is why that's part of the title was Individuality within Regularity. We're certainly not seeing cookie-cutter design. We're seeing things obviously having to respond to place. If we had more time, I could go through a whole list, about 10 features, which will be used to determine or impact the actual local design. This is helping us understand all these places. Okay, Part of the larger Getty project I mentioned earlier, we went as a group, we went to Roman Britain. Are we seeing things on this scale? Nowhere close. We spent days in Roman London, and I'm like, really? Come on. You want to see a temple? I can show you temples. Okay? We went to visit Rome and Greece. Some really impressive things. At the same time, do we have this? No way. Okay? That's what makes North Africa so special. So much is there. I just hope the current political situation gets better, enables us to travel safely, and test more things out. If you recall from one of my opening images, I had where the digital image fits. It's in the middle, but the arrows go both ways. Okay? We have some of these digital models. Now it's time to go back to some of these sites. Okay? And not just the actual data, but go back to the sites and see how some of these things work out. I hope simple thoughts, or quick imaging that I'm showing for Carthage, for Timgad, are helpful. Allow us to think about these cities in a different way. I think I'm pretty much right on time for my 45 minutes for the talk, and so I will end right there. Thank you.